But yeah, it's great that we have so many people to engage in this conversation. This is my qualifying master's work, and the paper's already written, and I left the date. And this is actually the original presentation I gave to qualify for my master's. I left the date up because Friday, April 12th, 2013, today is April 13th, 2014, and the same paper has been sitting in my drawer for a year. So on that note, I would like to open it up to anybody who's actually interested in working on this as a topic to take my paper. I've submitted it for publication, got rejected in reviews, who would be interested in taking some time in helping me recraft my theoretical section to be able to get published. So it's open, I'm all about collaboration, feel free to contact me. Before I get started, I also want to make a comment that would have formerly, 3 years ago when I first entered graduate school, would have had me shivering right now. But because I've gotten a lot more comfortable in my identity as a sociologist, I can deal with it. But I am one of the few data quantitative driven presentations here this weekend. And I just want to call attention to that because while we are working to integrate, apply our theories in real world context, I also just want to call attention to the fact that frequently quantitative measures are the ways that change is made in policy, and also that it's important to make bridges with people who are doing both qualitative and quantitative work to have those conversations and be able to really think through how to have our work make the most impact at a large scale. So I actually do subscribe to all of the things about quantitative data that we could think about. Like there is no objectivity in quantitative. It's just as subjective as qualitative, right? There is no God trick where I'm seeing everything objectively now. But at the same time, I want to be able to take my work to the table with the big players and be able to have it resonate with them at some level. So I've integrated both discourse analysis into a quantitative measurement. Okay, so what originally got me interested in looking at how non-native species are constructed is this distinction commonly made in the literature between native and non-native species. And that's what Joey, right, just brought us in and did a great job covering all that, right? We have this term, nativity, that we use to associate with birthplace and origin and natural and belonging and all of these space-place sort of connections. And it sucks that we don't have a window in here, but I love the English Ivy picture because every time I've presented, it's like, hey, look out the window! Because we're typically next to or in an ivory tower, literally. So a lot of these trout, right, trout's a big game species we don't think of as native or non-native necessarily, but that this framing has specific implications for how animals are treated. So, as I dug into the literature a little bit deeper, I found this really cool thing called Google Books, the Ngram viewer, and I would really strongly recommend it because it's not really a strong data point, but it is a really cool visualization. So what this graph up on the screen over here behind me is Google Books is this digital project that's taking all of these all this literature and digitizing it and putting it online, and you can search for language and phrases using this program to see how over time language has changed or a word has been used. So that blue line that you see on the bottom of the screen that just like comes out of nowhere and shots up, that's invasive. That's the word invasive. The red line, which is right at the top and stays pretty consistent until invasive comes and takes over, is exotic species, and the green line that's in the middle right there is introduced. The lines on the bottom are non-native and non-indigenous. I also wanted to include those because those are words that are used. But trying to get a sense of what happened in 1996 that made this word sort of like skyrocket off out of nowhere and take over. So of course I was looking at definitional frameworks similar to Joey, trying to figure out what are these distinctions that we're making when we're classifying invasives, non-natives, and using this terminology. So the USDA has this invasive conception that has these 3 key points: impacts to environment, impacts to economy, impacts to human health. Craig, 2010, looks at invasives as moving beyond their normal geographic range. Of course, you could see problematic uses of the term normal, right? What's normal? I'm clearly not. Where's Rebecca? We're talking about our animals, right? Not normal. Caladium Isaac want to integrate a definitional framework for invasives that sees them as progressive, right? Whereas invasion is this extensive impact, and non-native introduction is this low or a small marginal impact. And I chose to use the USDA's definition because I really liked this way that they have of sort of having these three components that I could very clearly look for in the literature, right? Environment, economy, health. And so I, of course, proposed, where I'm talking about scapegoats and things like that, proposed that economy would have the most impact as to whether or not something was considered invasive, because we live in this big capitalist society. So whether something was considered invasive or not, I was trying to link to very clear economic distinctions, whereas I thought human health and environment wouldn't be as pervasive as definitions. I looked further in the literature. Sagoff presents the idea that invasives are socially constructed by drawing attention to the large numbers of non-native U.S. agricultural plant species that are cultivated, genetically modified, and left to cross-fertilize with native and wild plants, right? Those aren't invasive, so it's okay to have those around, but those don't count as invasive. These crops, along with their livestock counterparts, are rarely investigated for the sociocultural and ecological impact they have on the environment. He also points out the fact that introduced species may increase local biodiversity in certain instances. So this follows with Joey's presentation, where invasives aren't always negative all the time, right? So you have to, the language itself, however, as Subramanian points out, is xenophobic and speaks to this idea of being scared of the foreigner, whereas you have to also consider that we don't necessarily have to be in that relationship that's around militaristic language and things like that. I can't pronounce these names. Simberlhoff says, wait a second, we can't just say that invasives are all socially constructed and do all this discourse analysis without actually considering the real impact too. And I do think it's important to consider how people as in like the hegemonic state or other institutions, science broadly, right, are portraying economics. So there are measurable economic impacts in terms of people are saying that zebra mussels have $10 million worth of damage, right? And you have to keep that information, whether or not you think it's valuable or not, present to be able to understand how to instigate change. Because if we don't keep these numbers and these relationships of how impactful non-natives are in different situations, then it's really difficult to kind of hold your own in these contexts. And the image I have up on the screen is of a feral cat killing a local bird, and you've probably seen in the literature there's always a new study, it feels like every couple of months, on how feral cats are having huge impacts on local ecologies, and people are letting their cats out, and it's had all this unprecedented impacts that we didn't really understand until we put cameras on the cats. And there's all these questions about, feral cats are actually on the top 100 invasive list, but we don't actually call them invasive, we call them feral. So these distinctions, right, are important. And I don't have a background in understanding the discourse around feral cats, but I just like them as a moment to kind of think through how we have both responsibilities and critiques, approaches, all these different dilemmas that go around a single species and also an individual. So, in order to develop a better understanding of this non-native invasive tension in the language, I explored 3 case examples. One of them was nutria. Thank you, Joey, already covered it. I'm not going to go back into it. The other that I looked at was zebra mussels, which I have here. And the third, I'm not going to go over, but I looked at the Lake Victoria fish. I can't think of the name, I haven't written it down, but it's the big fish in Lake Victoria. So I've looked at all of those species and kind of tried to see how they've been framed. And so when I looked at zebra mussels, the economic language, the economic relationships, they were fraught. They were all over the place. Anytime that zebra mussels were talked about, it was in regard to the impact that they were having on the screens that corporations, when they flush out water right into waterways, they have screens to kind of block. So they had to frequently replace those screens from the impact of zebra mussels, also on buoys, docks, boat hulls, that sort of recreational use of water, and how zebra mussels were attaching and having an impact there. The map on the bottom also shows the broad spread of zebra mussels, and they were originally, they crossed an ocean through our introduction of the water in transnational liners. So again, we've brought them here, and all the literature is very focused on how to eradicate them and the problems that they're causing, but there doesn't seem to be that historical reference to our human responsibility for actually bringing them and introducing them, and our continued human responsibility in bringing them to other waterways throughout the U.S. So with climate shift, it's changing the dynamics of ecosystems on both a local and global scale, and allowing these highly adaptive non-natives like zebra mussels to spread even more rapidly. So thinking about these different definitional frameworks and how they operate is significant.